Welcome to Lecture 12 of Financial Statement Analysis. In Part B of this lecture, we're going to discuss the final exam and the information that you need to make sure you're set up to do your online exam and you understand what to expect in that exam. So the Financial Statement Analysis final exam has a few rules and regulations, and I'm going to go through all those different rules and what you can expect. So first of all, it's a 130-minute exam. You would normally have a 2-hour exam with 10 minutes of reading time, so it would normally be 130 minutes in total. There's no reading time in this exam. You can start for as soon as you get in. So you've got 130 minutes to complete your exam, and it's going to be a computer-based exam using the AI invigilation software ProctorU. It's a closed book exam, so you can't have any other material. You can't look at your textbook. You can't have any notes or anything like that around you. You're going to be using the computer only. So this is going to differ for each of your subjects. So make sure each of your subjects you're aware of the specific requirements. What I've chosen for financial statement analysis is that you're going to use the computer only, so no pen, paper, or calculators allowed. And that means you'll keep your eyes on the screen most of the time. You know, a little glance away is probably fine, but not looking like this off screen for many minutes, or the ProctorU system would classify that as cheating. Okay, so we're going to be using the computer, and to do that, to make sure you've got working out space and calculating abilities, Microsoft Excel is going to be allowed. We've used Excel in nearly all of our tutorials, at least since we've started doing calculation stuff. You've used it for your assignments and applying the valuation model. So I think it's appropriate. It's probably easier than a physical calculator to actually do the calculations required and make sure you can clearly show all your working out when you're going through and answering these questions. So in the exam, ProctorU will be set up to allow you to open up a new blank Microsoft Excel spreadsheet. Okay, so maybe on your desktop, make sure you've got a shortcut to Microsoft Excel. So when you're in the exam, minimize the exam window and open up Excel and switch between Excel and your exam. Okay. You're not allowed to open an existing spreadsheet, so you won't be able to open up the Gale Pacific spreadsheet. If you try and do that, you will get flagged as cheating. So make sure you're just opening up a new spreadsheet there. There is a formula sheet included in the exam. It's the same formula sheet as in the practice exam, so you can have a look at what's included. It doesn't have every formula for the subject, has the ratios and gives you a pretty good idea for the valuation models, but for example, it doesn't include your cost of capital formulas. A few other rules: you will get only one attempt at the exam. When you log in and see the system, it will say there's 3 attempts allowed, but that's purely if ProctorU has any issues and kicks you out, then they will allow you to open the exam again, but you are only allowed to have 1 attempt at the exam. Okay, so you've got 130 minutes from when you log in and 1 attempt at the exam. Make sure you check your own exam timetable. You may have special considerations or clashes between exams, and you may be rescheduled to different times. The time and date I've put here is for people who will be doing the main exam. So the main exam window is from 3:30 p.m. to 9:30 p.m. on Tuesday, the 23rd of June. Don't trust this information. You may have situations that mean you have been rescheduled or have alternative special considerations, those kind of things. Check your own timetable to verify that information. So if you do have an exam between 3:30 and 9:30, 9:30 is the time that all the exams would be submitted. Okay, you must begin the exam between 3:30 and 7:20, because the way ProctorU is set up is it will not allow you to access the exam if you do not have 130 minutes until the submission time. So if you tried to access the exam at 7:30, ProctorU would not allow you to start the exam because you do not have 130 minutes left to finish it. So don't plan on just spending an hour in the exam. It just won't allow you to do that. So make sure you're logging on earlier in the window. Okay. You might have your internet have problems. ProctorU might have problems. UTS Online might have problems. So if you're trying to log in at 7:19 and there's any delays, you just wouldn't be allowed to sit the exam. So make sure you get in there earlier and don't leave it to that last part of the window. As you're doing so, even if you do start at 5:30, your exam's going to auto submit after 130 minutes. Okay, so the time is set. It's going to submit your exam for you as you go along and reach that time limit. So to access the final exam for FSA, it's going to be accessed via UTS Online, via the FSA page. And when you're in the FSA page, on the left-hand menu here under exams, there's a link to the final exams. If you click on that at the moment, it will be blank, but when the exam timetable or the time window is reached, there will be a link to the main final exam that looks exactly like this. Okay, you can then click on it. It's going to give you some exam instructions. Okay, Excel spreadsheets are allowed, closed book exam, the kind of things we just talked about. No toilet breaks are allowed during the AI proctored exams, so make sure you're ready to sit down for your 130 minutes straight. Then underneath here, there'd be a button where you can begin it, and that would launch you into the ProctorU setup and verification stages. To make sure you understand what that exam is going to look like when you actually enter it, I've set up the FSA practice exam, so the link for the practice exam, and there's some more information about the exam instructions and ProctorU information as well. So if you click on the FSA practice final exam, you can begin that exam and have a look at the different types of questions that we're going to have in our real exam. The final exam is going to be marked out of 100, so there's 100 marks on offer, and overall that will scale down to 40% of your total assessment weighting. When you enter the final exam, it's going to display 20 questions. 3 of those questions are worth 0 marks. I've put them in for blank working out space in case you want to type down a few notes and jot down some ideas when you first enter into the exam. So for example, you look at the cost of the capital asset pricing model formula just before you go into the exam, and you open up your exam and you want to write down that formula just so you don't forget it later on. There's some blank working out spaces where you can just jot down your notes when you enter into the exam. So what you'll actually be completing is 17 questions, which will be totaling up to 100 marks. All the material from lecture 1 to 10 is examinable, and there's more of a focus on lecture 6 to 10. Lecture 6 is from forecasting onwards, so our forecasting, valuation models, and cost of capital have more of an emphasis than the early theoretical stuff on Porter's 5 forces or accounting analysis. Now, the way this exam is going to be structured, again, may be different to your other subjects. The way I've set it up is we're going to be giving you randomly allocated questions from question banks on each topic. Now, because there is a 6-hour exam window, my concern was that if someone does the exam at 3:30 and finishes up by about 5:30, they could then tell their friends what questions were in the exam. Their friends might have an hour or two to study before starting the exam by about 7 o'clock. We don't want that sort of cheating to occur where information spillover occurs between students who do the exam early and students who do the exam late. So the way I'm dealing with this is random questions. So as an example, your friend does the exam early and they got a question on the residual income model. They tell you that, hey, the residual income model's in the exam, make sure you study that. When you then sit the exam, you will be randomly allocated a question and you might get any of the 4 valuation models. So when I say all material from lecture 1 to 10 is examinable, that means all the main topics could be in your exam. Your friend might get residual income model and you might get a question on the discounted cash flow model. The random allocation will work within topics. So everyone will be randomly allocated one question from, say, accounting analysis. Okay. Then everyone will be randomly allocated a question from valuation and a question from cost of capital. So you get the same content in your exam. Everyone will have the same number of questions on the same overall topics, but the material within those topics will be different. And the questions are written in a way to make sure the difficulty level maintains consistency between exams. So you're not going to get a hard exam while your friend gets an easy exam. If you prepare for all the material, you'll be prepared for all the questions, and it doesn't matter which random allocation you get because the difficulty level between those randomly allocated questions is very similar. This is the formula sheet that's going to be included in your final exam. It's the same formula sheet that's included in the practice exam. Your ratios are given here, and the valuation models are loosely given. So if you look closely, for the residual income model, it just says RI or ROI here. I want you to actually know how to calculate the residual income. It's a very important concept in this exam or in this subject. So I want you to know what residual income is. It's when you're earning a profit higher than your equity times your cost of capital. Okay, it's higher than your expected profit. So here's your formula sheet. When you do the practice exam and you do your study, only use this formula sheet so that you're prepared in the exam for what is actually in here. You'll note the capital asset pricing model and the weighted average cost of capital are not included here. and the forecasting template's not included here either. So they're things that I expect that you'll be able to practice and remember when you get into the exam. As I mentioned previously, when you're in the exam, there will be 3 questions that have 0 marks allocated to them. This is what they'll look like. In the exam question, it will say 0 points, and this is the same in the practice exam and your final exam. And then the actual question will say, this question is not graded, you may use the space for working out. So anything you type in here, we're not going to mark that. That's for you to take down your notes. So if there's something you're struggling to remember and you want to write it down at the start of the exam, that's fine to do. Okay, so there's going to be 3 spaces in your exam, 1 at the start after the formula sheet, then 1 below that, and then 1 at the very end of your exam. So you can quickly scroll to the top or bottom of your exam page to go to these working out spaces. You could also write any notes you want in your Microsoft Excel spreadsheet that you open up during the exam as well. The final exam is going to consist of 3 different types of question, which are the same as in your practice exam. Multiple choice, numeric answer, and discussion questions will all be asked in the final exam. So multiple choice, everyone's familiar with them. Do the practice exam, you'll see what they look like. You just check the box of whatever one you think is the correct answer. You'll see over up here, it'll quickly move to saved. Okay, so after you choose an answer, the system will save your answer. You can then go back and change it if you want to change your mind, and it will resave your new answer. You'll see the number of points for multiple choice questions are going to generally be 2.5 or 5 points for multiple choice, so much smaller weightings. There'll be between 4 and 6 options depending on the question. So this is a multiple choice with 6 options. Some of them will be 4 options depending on what question we've got. Numeric answer questions, these are just the calculation questions. So for example, this question here from your practice exam, it's a simple calculation question. You enter the number directly into the box. Once you've entered that, again, it'll save your answer. You'll get the little tick there and your answer there will be saved. Don't put any words or text or anything in there. You can just put the numbers in there. Okay, so that will get marked automatically. There's a little bit of leeway in the system to deal with rounding errors. So sometimes our calculation questions, if you use Excel, you don't have to worry about rounding because it will just keep all the decimal places in the calculation for you. And then when you answer your question, if you just go to something like 2 decimal places, that'll be fine. And any rounding errors will be okay. So you don't need to stress about them. Finally, the discussion questions. These are just where you have an empty text box where you have to answer the question. So from your practice exam, there's a question on Porter's 5 forces, and you just type away in the box. And again, the question will be saved once you move on, or your answer will be saved once you move on to the next one. The discussion questions are often worth more marks. So for example, this is a 10-point one. Now, one of the key differences in an online exam compared to your traditional paper exam, there is no guide for how long you should write for your answer. So in a paper-based exam, would often give you maybe half a page to answer, or 2 pages if we expect it to be a longer answer. This box will accept up to 10,000 words in answering. So it's up to you to think about how long should the answer to your discussion question be. 10 points, it's a 100-point exam, so you'd say this is worth 10% of your overall exam. It's a 130-minute exam, so about 13 minutes. So if I got a question like this, I'd want to answer it in about 10 minutes. Get whatever important knowledge you have out on the screen in 10 minutes. The advantage of text boxes compared to a written answer, you can move around where you're answering. You've got the delete key, so you don't have to scribble things out. So you should find you're actually quicker at answering these questions if your typing's okay compared to handwritten answers. Copy paste will be disabled. So if you want to move a paragraph from the start to finish after you've written it, copy paste is disabled. You'd have to sort of go through and make sure you're writing the answer in the part that you want it to be read in. Okay, so that concludes what your final exam is going to look like in UTS Online. The structure and style will be very similar to your practice exam. Multiple choice, numeric answer, and discussion questions. It'll add up to 100 marks, but the questions may be on different topics to your practice exam. For example, your practice exam has a residual income model question. But in your real exam, you're not guaranteed a residual income model question. You're going to be randomly allocated a question on either dividend model, residual income, cash flows, or residual operating income. So the exams will look similar, but it doesn't mean the same topics will be in the practice exam and the final exam. So let's move on to the ProctorU system. Your exam's going to be AI invigilated by the ProctorU software. So here are some instructions that you need to follow to make sure you're prepared to do the exam. So before the exam, you have to consent to doing an exam with ProctorU. Okay, so you can do that. The link here sends you to your My Student Admin where you can consent. You have to create a ProctorU account using your UTS email address. You then have to make sure you've got the right equipment for the exam. So there's a list here. You need to have a microphone, a webcam. You need to be in a well-lit room so it can see your face. You need to have a decent internet connection so that it can stream your webcam and audio data to the ProctorU system so it can be analyzed. You need to make sure you've downloaded the ProctorU browser extension for Chrome or Firefox. Okay, and in China, Firefox only. So once you've done all this, a practice exam using the ProctorU system has just been released. This is practice for their system, and it is different to the FSA practice exam that I was just talking about, which is to practice your content. So make sure you do the ProctorU practice exam, which is available for you guys on UTS Online. That'll allow you to practice the technical setup, making sure you're accessing the system, you know what it's going to look like. On exam day, all you need to do is go into UTS Online, make sure you've got your ProctorU browser extension active and you're signed into it, and then you'll be able to log into the exam as I showed before. Just the same as your practice, except it will be taking the webcam and microphone data and checking your screen to make sure you're not trying to access information that you're not meant to. So within the exam, all you'll be able to do is have your exam tab open and then open up Excel. Anything else you try and open up, so if you open up any new tabs in your browser, that'll be locked, you won't be able to. If you try and open up any other software, that'll be flagged by the AI. It monitors if you're opening up any other software, so that would be flagged as cheating. So only have open your blank Excel file and your exam tab. All the other tabs and everything else you need to make sure you've got closed. When you enter in the exam, make sure you've got your student ID or government ID card to prove your identity to ProctorU. So a little bit of a checklist to finish up. Have you gone through that prior list of things of setting up your ProctorU account? Okay, have you tried the ProctorU practice exam? Do you know where the final exam will be? Then more importantly, have you planned where and when you'll attempt the exam? Have you made sure that you'll have a quiet space with a stable internet connection? Do you have access to the webcam and microphone? Make sure all those things are sorted out in advance to your exams so that you know exactly what time you're going to be sitting the exam, where you're going to be sitting it, and what the circumstances will be. Make sure you don't forget your ID card. You've got to prove your identity to the ProctorU system to ensure your identity. So make sure you've got that on you. So if you are leaving your house to do the exam somewhere else that's maybe quiet or with a better internet connection, make sure you've got your ID on you as well. So now we're starting to get towards the end of things. The study checklist. How to make sure you're actually prepared for the material. We've just talked a lot about making sure you're prepared for what the online exam looks like. How do you make sure you're going to have good answers in your online exam? Make sure you practice the FSA practice exam. Make sure you can answer, especially those calculation questions. They're a little bit different to the tutorial questions in that often I'm only asking you to calculate one thing at a time in the questions. You have Excel. You can use that as your calculator and working space. Make sure you can answer those practice exam questions using Excel because they're going to be of a similar style and setup at least. When you're doing the practice exam, are you only using the formula sheet that's provided? Have you memorized those other formulas that you need to, like the forecast template or the cost of capital calculations? In the learning material folder, I've got a revision practice practical question. So that goes from reformatting, ratios, forecasting, and valuation. Make sure you can do that question without looking at the solutions or using Excel as well. So that if you can complete that question in Excel under exam conditions in a short amount of time, then you can be pretty comfortable going into the exam that those calculation questions won't throw up any curveballs. Then, have you reviewed the tutorial homework questions? Have you rewatched the lecture and read the textbook to understand the theoretical concepts? So the normal ways that you would study for these kind of subjects. But the practice exam and the revision practical question will be really important to make sure you're capable of doing this online exam in a good time. So that's it for me for the semester. Thank you to everyone who's engaged in the subject, made the tutorials enjoyable, and put in so much effort into your individual assignments. I've really appreciated all the hard work that you guys have put in throughout what's been a very difficult semester. The final exam, there's no tricks in it, so that means the more you practice, the more likely you're going to succeed in that exam and get the marks that you're aiming for. So make sure you do allocate some time over the next week and a half to study for the exam, and make sure you can study for the exam under exam conditions, not looking at your textbook. Make sure you've got things in your mind, that you've remembered the key pieces of information, you understand the practical calculations, and you understand the theoretical components of why we're doing what we're doing. Best of luck, everyone, and I hope you do very well. And for those of you that are graduating this semester, well done on completing your degrees. All the best. Thanks, guys.